Don't you dare speak when you're poor, Mrs. Hall snapped. Her eyes filled with contempt as she reached for the large vase of water on the table. Without warning, she splashed it over Kira's head, drenching her in front of everyone. This was supposed to be a dinner for reconciliation, a chance for Kira to make amends, or so Mrs. Hall had claimed. But this was her idea of peace? As the water dripped down Kira's face, she realized just how little the Hall family understood who they were dealing with. What they didn't know was that Kira's silence didn't come from weakness. It came from something far stronger. Keira was the one who held the key to their family's fortune. Stay tuned for the shocking truth. Don't forget to support the channel, comment where you're watching from, and tell us, if you were in Keira's shoes, would you act as she did or would you have reacted differently? Watch till the end to see how she handles it. Keira Miller had never been fond of extravagant displays, yet here she was, driving her aging sedan up the long driveway of the Hall family estate. The invitation had come under the guise of reconciliation, a chance to clear the air, or so her ex-mother-in-law had claimed. Keira had been reluctant, but curiosity had won out. She arrived just in time, or so she thought. The moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere hit her. It was stifling, as if the house itself was too eager to flaunt its wealth. The Hall estate, with its over-the-top decor, screamed of opulence in a way that felt both excessive and hollow. Every piece of furniture, every glint of crystal, seemed like a deliberate attempt to mask the emptiness beneath. She had expected to find Andrew, her ex-husband, of course, and his new fiancée, Chloe. What she hadn't anticipated was the eerie silence that followed her entrance, as if time itself had paused. Andrew was sitting at the large polished dining table, his hand clasped tightly with Chloe's, the young woman radiating confidence and ambition. Chloe, with her bright eyes and an aura that practically begged for attention, was everything Keira had once been, before the marriage had slowly eaten away at her sense of self. "Ah, Keira," came the voice of Andrew's mother, her words sweet but laced with venom. She stepped forward, holding out a delicate teapot as though offering peace. "We're so glad you could join us tonight. We wanted you to see how happy Andrew is, now that he's with someone who has the drive and ambition you never quite had." Kira's smile never faltered, though the words stung more than she'd care to admit. She had spent years trying to please the Hall family, bending to their will, playing the role they demanded of her, only to have it end in a divorce that had been anything but civil. Now to hear Andrew's mother say such things with such smug satisfaction, it felt as though the years of sacrifice had been nothing more than a cruel joke. She noticed Chloe looking at her, a slight tilt of the head as if unsure of how to react. Keira didn't bother to mask the thought that crossed her mind. "This is the woman he chose?" The conversation continued, as if it were all scripted. Mrs. Hall praised Andrew's supposed achievements at work, her tone a mix of maternal pride and thinly veiled superiority. The moment Keira had dreaded was about to come. "And of course," Mrs. Hall went on, her voice rising just a touch, "Chloe was recently hired as the head of creative at KM Holdings. I'm sure you've heard of it, but I doubt you ever dreamed of being part of such an organization." Kira's stomach twisted, but she kept her composure. She knew exactly who Chloe was now. She had signed off on the young woman's hiring only a week prior. But Keira didn't let on. She looked at Chloe with a subtle smile, not a trace of jealousy, but rather the calculated gaze of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. Chloe, blissfully unaware of the storm beneath the surface, smiled back, though her eyes held a trace of uncertainty. "Well," Keira said, her voice smooth, almost bored, "I'm glad to see Andrew has found someone so capable." She looked down at the cup of tea in front of her fingers curling around the handle, her expression unreadable. She could feel Andrew's eyes on her, and she knew what he was thinking. He thought she'd come here to beg for his approval, to grovel at his feet like the pathetic woman he'd painted her to be. But Keira wasn't that woman anymore. She let go of the need for his validation a long time ago. "How's life been for you, Keira?" Chloe asked, a tentative smile playing at her lips. Keira glanced up, meeting Chloe's gaze with a soft, almost imperceptible smile. "Oh, you know," she said lightly, "just living the dream." The conversation drifted on, but Keira felt a strange calmness settle over her. Her ex-husband, the man who had once been her world, was now just another figure in a stage play. She was no longer the woman who had begged for his attention, the woman who had been swept into a life of empty promises. As the dinner stretched on, Keira couldn't help but smile to herself. She was playing her part, yes, but she had learned the rules of the game long ago. Andrew might have moved on, but Keira Miller, she was just getting started. Dinner was a drawn-out affair, each course served with as much care as if it were a performance. Keira sat at the grand table, her posture perfect, her face an unreadable mask. Andrew, ever the eager performer, practically leaned over the edge of his seat as he told his mother about his latest supposed accomplishments at work. His voice rang with pride, though Keira knew better. All the projects he spoke of, his upcoming presentations, his new position, were all funded by KM Holdings. They were Keira's projects, Keira's money. The words hung in the air, heavy with their falsehoods. Mrs. Hall, her face glowing with satisfaction, chimed in every so often, her compliments cutting deeper with each word. Andrew is really going places now, Keira. A man of vision and success. She paused, glancing at Chloe, who sat beside Andrew, smiling so sweetly it almost made Keira sick. He's such a catch, don't you think, Chloe? Chloe nodded politely, though Keira could see the slight hesitance in her gaze. It was almost as if she knew she was caught in a web of deceit, but didn't yet have the courage to escape it. Kira's eyes flickered over Chloe, no longer seeing her as a rival, but as a pawn in this theater of pretension. The contrast between the Hall family's self-assured boasting and Kira's quiet, unspoken knowledge couldn't have been more glaring. The discussion moved to Andrew's supposed financial achievements, his bonus, his new salary. Keira, feeling the weight of their words pressing against her skin, finally put her fork down. "Are you inviting me here to put on this farce?" Kira's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. She looked at Andrew, her gaze unwavering. "Because if so, I must say it's a waste of time." Andrew stiffened, his fork clattering against his plate. Mrs. Hall looked momentarily shocked before recovering, her smile never faltering. "Keira, I know it's hard for you to accept that Andrew has moved on, but this is the reality. You should be proud that he's found someone who knows how to take charge." Keira turned her attention to Chloe, who had gone silent under the weight of the conversation. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze direct. "You're talented, Chloe. I reviewed your application myself. So tell me." Keira leaned forward slightly, her voice low but laced with challenge. "Why would someone with your ability choose to tie herself to a family like this? Do you really think you can build a future here? With them?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and unrelenting. Chloe's eyes flickered with uncertainty, her smile faltering. She opened her mouth as though to respond, but Keira wasn't finished. Keira glanced briefly at Andrew, then back to Chloe, her words deliberate. "You have everything you need to rise, but you're choosing to sink with them. What happens when you realize it's all just smoke and mirrors?" Andrew's hand slammed down on the table with a force that made the fine china tremble. "Shut up, Keira," he snapped, his face reddening. The veins in his neck bulged as he glared at her, his voice rising. "You think you can come here and lecture me about success?" But it wasn't Andrew who made the most dramatic move. In a flash of fury, Mrs. Hall reached for the large flower vase that sat in the center of the table, her eyes wild with rage. Keira saw it coming too late to react. Mrs. Hall, with a swift and violent motion, poured the water from the vase over Keira's head. The cold, stagnant water soaked her hair, running down her face, dripping onto her blouse. The smell of old flowers and dampness filled the air. Keira didn't flinch, didn't wipe the water from her face. She simply sat there, her eyes meeting Mrs. Hall's with an icy calmness that sent a shiver down Andrew's spine. The room fell silent. Keira didn't say a word as the wet fabric of her blouse clung to her skin. She stood slowly, the room watching her every movement. Her gaze flicked to each person at the table, lingering on Andrew, then on Chloe. She could see the confusion in Chloe's eyes, the pity that seemed to flicker there before quickly being masked by guilt. Kira's voice was quiet but cutting as she spoke, each word deliberate and slow. That water, she said, her tone like ice, has washed away the last shred of any bond I thought we might still share. Tomorrow you will all learn what it means to live on your own merits without the illusions of wealth or status. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving the Hall family in stunned silence. Chloe sat frozen in her seat, her mind racing, unsure of what had just happened, but knowing that the world she had walked into was no longer what it seemed. Keira stepped into the penthouse, her sanctuary away from the world that had once confined her. The soft hum of the city below felt distant here, as if the entire world had been locked outside her sleek glass walls. The chill of the marble floors, the smooth texture of the dark wood furniture, everything in this place spoke of power and control. She was far from the woman they had tried to reduce her to earlier that evening. In this space, she was Keira Miller, CEO, strategist, and a force to be reckoned with. She removed the damp blouse, discarding the remnants of the humiliating dinner with a single motion. The smell of stagnant water lingered, but Keira didn't flinch. She moved toward the shower with purpose. The warm water poured over her, washing away the anger, the frustration, and the lingering sting of Mrs. Hall's cruelty. By the time she emerged, her skin was glowing, her expression calm and composed. Her transformation was complete. The woman who stepped into the living room now was not the broken ex-wife, but a powerful figure, every inch a leader, ready to reclaim what had been taken from her. She slid into the plush armchair, her fingers brushing against the sleek glass of her phone as she scrolled through the latest updates on her company. Her assistant had already sent over the financial report on the Hall family. Keira read through it, her eyes narrowing as she took in the details. The Hall family's wealth, the things they flaunted with such pride, was nothing more than a facade. The extravagant lifestyle they lived was funded entirely by the company she had built. KM Holdings' influence ran deep within their pockets, with all their so-called success stemming from high-interest loans and perks for top-tier employees. But the most shocking discovery was that Andrew had been siphoning funds, small sums at first, but enough to fund the lavish gifts he had bought for Chloe. A bitter laugh escaped Kira's lips as she read the report. He hadn't changed. Even now, after all they had been through, Andrew was still the same man who had cheated and lied. She could almost hear his voice in her mind, the same arrogant tone that had always been too sure of himself, too convinced that he could get away with everything. The thought of him, of his betrayal, was enough to make her heart race with both anger and something else, something colder. Keira set the report down and pressed a button on her desk. Her assistant Michael appeared on the screen almost instantly. "Have you checked on Andrew's projects?" she asked, her tone businesslike, the venom of the dinner still simmering beneath her calm exterior. "Everything's going smoothly with the audits," Michael replied. "He's still overseeing the 3 major projects that were approved for the quarter." Kira's eyes gleamed with calculation. Freeze all of Andrew's projects. Put them under quality review. Don't give him any notice. I want them stalled indefinitely. Michael hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Understood. What's the next move?" Keira leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she considered her next steps. "Send an anonymous email to Chloe. I want her to know about Andrew's little side deal. Let her know that if she stays, she'll be complicit in his actions." "I want her to think about that." She paused, staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching as the lights of the city twinkled like stars beneath her. But her mind wasn't on the city. It was on Chloe. Keira wasn't the type to hold grudges without cause. She knew how to separate personal feelings from business. Chloe had talent. Keira had seen it in the young woman's work, and though her decision to join the Hall family might have been foolish, it didn't erase the potential Keira recognized. "No matter what, Chloe stays. I'll approve her project proposal," Keira added after a beat, her voice soft but firm. "The work she submitted was excellent. She deserves the chance, but only on her own merit. Not because of who she's dating." Michael nodded, his expression a mix of respect and admiration. "Got it. I'll handle it." Keira ended the call and leaned back in her chair, her gaze focused and intense. She wasn't in a hurry. Andrew and the Hall family were about to realize the difference between what they thought they had and what they truly controlled. It was a game, and Keira Miller always played to win. A week had passed since that disastrous dinner, and Keira had moved on. The ripple effects of her actions, however, had only just begun to make their mark. Andrew, still reeling from the humiliation of the evening, had thrown himself into his work, though he hadn't realized the storm brewing beneath the surface. It started small. A routine check from the accounting department led to the discovery that his corporate credit cards had been frozen. Keira had been thorough. She hadn't left a trace for him to follow. At first, Andrew thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the system. He called the IT department, asking if there had been any errors. "The system must be down," he muttered to himself, running his hands through his hair in frustration. His mind refused to accept the possibility that someone was actively working against him. But the more he tried to fix things, the more the holes in his financial dealings widened. Every call he made, every explanation he gave, seemed to be a dead end. At home, things weren't much better. Mrs. Hall, his ever-proud mother, had begun to notice the shift in the family status. The extravagant dinners, the vacations, everything they had been able to maintain with the illusion of wealth was now in jeopardy. Andrew had spent the last few days apologizing to her, promising that it was just a temporary setback. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. His position was slipping. It was Chloe who first brought up the invitation. She was excited, her voice high-pitched as she relayed the news. "We've been invited to the KM Holdings Anniversary Gala. Can you believe it, Andrew? This is huge." Chloe's bright eyes sparkled with anticipation. She had no idea that the invitation, far from being a symbol of Andrew's success, was a calculated move on Keira's part to ensure the family's downfall. "We're invited because you've been doing so well, right?" Chloe continued, her excitement palpable. Andrew, ever the optimist, forced a smile and nodded. "Of course, darling. It's all part of the plan. Just wait until I'm promoted. Then we'll be living in luxury again." But Andrew's optimism couldn't hide the growing sense of panic that clung to him. When he called Keira later that day, his voice was a mixture of anger and desperation. "Keira, I need you to sign the paperwork to forfeit the last of your shares. I can't have this hanging over me while I step into a new role at KM Holdings. It's time for you to move on, too." Keira could almost hear the smugness in his voice, the same arrogance he had displayed when he thought he was in control. She leaned back in her chair, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You want me to sign the paperwork?" she asked, her voice calm, almost amused. "Fine. I'll bring it to you in person. I'll make sure to bring it to the gala." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Andrew scoffed. "You? At the gala? You must be delusional, Keira. You'll never get past security. Don't even think about it." Keira chuckled softly, her tone laced with sarcasm. "We'll see about that, Andrew. I'll see you at the party. Don't forget to bring the paperwork." As she ended the call, Keira's smile faded, replaced by a look of determination. She wasn't about to let Andrew think he had any control over her life anymore. He had underestimated her once, and now she was going to make sure he knew just how wrong he was. That evening, Keira sat in her penthouse, the city lights sparkling outside her windows, and she carefully planned her next move. She wasn't just going to attend the gala as a form of revenge. No, this was about taking back control. She would show Andrew, his mother, and Chloe exactly who held the power. The gala was nothing short of spectacular. The glittering lights, the soft hum of whispered conversations, and the faint clink of champagne glasses created a scene of polished elegance. It was the kind of event where the world's most influential people gathered to flaunt their power, their wealth, and their status. The Hall family, dressed in their finest attire, mingled with guests, their voices carrying with a sense of superiority. Mrs. Hall, ever the social butterfly, flitted from one guest to the next, laughing a little too loudly, making sure everyone around her knew that her son was on the cusp of a major promotion. Andrew, despite his growing anxiety over the recent financial chaos, was doing his best to maintain his composed exterior. He smiled at his guests, nodding in agreement as they spoke about future business deals, his hand never far from Chloe's. Chloe, on the other hand, was clearly in awe of the entire spectacle. Her wide eyes darted from one luxury item to the next, absorbing every piece of the high society world she had just entered. She smiled politely but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As she glanced at Andrew, she couldn't help but wonder what was going on beneath the surface. She had heard whispers about financial troubles, but no one was confirming anything. The Hall family was too focused on their illusion of success. Then, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The MC took the stage, his voice booming through the speakers, commanding everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to welcome the founder and chairman of KM Holdings, the visionary behind this incredible empire. The lights flickered, and for a split second, the room fell into darkness. Then, with a dramatic swoosh, the spotlight flickered to life, focusing on the grand staircase that led into the heart of the venue. The hush in the room was palpable as the crowd shifted, waiting in anticipation. Keira Miller descended the staircase with the kind of grace that commanded attention, her presence undeniable. She was draped in a black velvet evening gown, the fabric clinging to her figure as if it were tailored just for her. The gown shimmered under the spotlight, and every step she took seemed deliberate, purposeful. Her hair, once wet and tangled from the dinner, was now styled elegantly, her makeup flawless. The woman who had been humiliated days ago was gone. In her place was someone new, someone untouchable. Andrew's hand froze midair as he reached for his glass of wine. His eyes widened in disbelief as Keira appeared at the top of the stairs. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. He stood there frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. Mrs. Hall's jaw dropped as she stared, her mind racing to piece together the woman standing before her, with the woman she had so casually humiliated just days ago. Impossible, she muttered under her breath, barely able to form a coherent thought. She blinked, unsure if she was imagining the situation. Chloe stood beside Andrew, her eyes fixed on Keira as she made her way down the stairs. At first there was confusion, but then a realization hit her. The woman she had pitied, the woman she had thought was beneath her, was now the most powerful person in the room. Keira wasn't just a survivor of a marriage gone wrong. She was a titan in the business world, someone whose reputation Chloe had always admired from afar. Keira reached the bottom of the stairs, her eyes scanning the room as the guests fell silent. She looked directly at Andrew, her gaze unwavering before stepping up to the podium. She was no longer just a woman who had been cast aside. She was Keira Miller, a force to be reckoned with, and tonight she would prove it. The room fell still as Keira took the microphone, her voice steady and strong as she addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone clear and commanding, "we live in a world where appearance often trumps truth. We value success, but we rarely stop to question how it was achieved. In business, as in life, there is one thing that stands above all else: integrity." Her words echoed in the room, and as she spoke, her gaze never wavered from the Hall family. She could see Andrew's discomfort, the shift in his expression as his lies were laid bare. Mrs. Hall's attempt at control seemed hollow in the face of Keira's poise. Chloe stood quietly, caught in the weight of Keira's words, unable to tear her gaze away from the woman who had once been her competition but was now her superior. Keira continued, "A successful business isn't built on lies or deceit. It's built on trust, on honesty. And tonight, I stand before you not just as the CEO of KM Holdings, but as someone who believes in the power of doing business the right way. No shortcuts, no games." As Keira finished her speech, the room remained silent. No one dared to speak. She had made her point. Keira wasn't just a survivor. She was a winner. And for Andrew and his family, this was just the beginning of their downfall. Keira descended from the podium, her gaze steady as she walked toward the crowd. The silence in the room was deafening, everyone still processing the words that had just been spoken. Andrew stood frozen, his face flushed with panic. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared for Keira to turn the tables on him so publicly, so definitively. But his shock quickly gave way to desperation. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, could feel the walls closing in. He had to regain control somehow. "Keira," he called out, his voice strained but attempting to sound casual, as if everything were fine. "You know I didn't mean it like that. It's just, I was only trying to protect us, all of us." His voice wavered, but he pushed forward, trying to mask his fear. "Please, just give me another chance." I know I've made mistakes, but you know I love you. You're just testing me, right? You're playing some kind of game." Keira stopped in her tracks, not even glancing at him. She had heard it all before. The same excuses, the same empty promises. She wasn't interested in his words anymore. She had heard enough, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. Without speaking a word, Keira gestured to the side, where the head of HR, a sharp, composed woman named Clara, stood waiting with a tablet in hand. The moment Keira gave the signal, Clara stepped forward, her voice clear and authoritative. "Andrew Hall," Clara began, her words ringing out in the hushed room. "Due to violations of corporate ethics and gross misuse of company funds, your employment with KM Holdings is terminated, effective immediately." The room seemed to hold its breath as the news sank in. Andrew's mouth went dry, his eyes wide with disbelief. He opened his mouth to protest, to beg for another chance, but the words wouldn't come. His mind was reeling, his body trembling, but it was too late. Clara swiped her tablet, and the screen flickered to life. The image projected onto the large screen behind her. Andrew's financial transactions. In stark detail, the evidence was laid bare for everyone to see. Luxury purchases, expensive gifts for his new wife, and lavish trips, all charged to the company account. The crowd murmured, a collective gasp filling the air. Kira's plan had worked perfectly, and the truth was now undeniable. Andrew stood there frozen, his pride shattered. His heart raced, but all he could do was stare at the screen, the proof of his betrayal, his dishonesty, displayed for all to see. His world was crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Before he could gather himself enough to speak, chaos erupted. Mrs. Hall, who had been standing quietly by Andrew's side, now rushed forward, her face contorted with rage. She pushed through the crowd, her voice shrill as she shouted, "This is outrageous! You can't do this! My son built this company from the ground up. How dare you?" But before she could finish her tirade, security moved swiftly, stepping in between her and Keira, their firm hands guiding her away. Mrs. Hall struggled, her face a mask of fury, but it was clear she was out of control. Keira remained calm, stepping closer to Mrs. Hall as she was escorted out. "Do you remember that perfume bottle, Mrs. Hall?" Kira's voice was low, but it carried across the now silent room. "The one you were so proud of when you flaunted it at my dinner? Well, that house you live in?" Keira paused, allowing the words to sink in, her voice dripping with coldness. "It belongs to my company. You have 24 hours to vacate. I'm not going to pour water on your head like last time, but I will take the roof over it." Mrs. Hall's eyes went wide as the realization hit her. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. Kira's gaze was unyielding, and the room held its breath, watching the confrontation unfold. As security led Mrs. Hall out, Keira turned her attention back to Andrew, who was now seated at a table, his head in his hands, utterly defeated. Chloe, standing off to the side, was silent, her face pale as she processed everything that had just happened. She had been complicit in this web of lies, and now the consequences were crashing down on her, too. Kira's job wasn't finished yet, but tonight she had made her point. The Hall family's world was crumbling, and it was all because of their own actions. Now it was time for Keira to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her. The scene was chaos, the once elegant gala now a backdrop to the crumbling facade of the Hall family. Andrew sat at a table, his head in his hands, defeated. His world had just unraveled in front of everyone. Mrs. Hall had already been escorted out by security, her rage still echoing in the hallways of the event. The guests, those who had once admired him, now looked at him with disdain, their whispers cutting through the air like a cold breeze. Chloe stood frozen at the edge of the room, her mind racing. She had always admired Andrew, believed in him, trusted him, but everything she thought she knew about him had shattered in a matter of moments. The weight of his lies, the betrayal of trust, all of it was now laid bare for the world to see. She could feel her stomach churn, the pit in her chest growing heavier with every passing second. Andrew looked up, his eyes wide with panic. He locked eyes with Chloe, his voice low and pleading. "Chloe, please," he said, his words strained. You have to help me. Talk to Keira. You know how much she values you. You're her employee. You're the one who can fix this." Chloe's heart sank as she listened to him. She had spent the past few days trying to convince herself that maybe this was just a phase, that things would get better. But now, standing in front of Andrew, she saw him for what he truly was. Someone who would throw anyone under the bus to save himself. Kira's warning from the dinner echoed in her mind. She had seen the truth then, in the quiet way Keira had spoken, in the calm assurance that had made Chloe pause. "This family is a wreck. If you stay here, you'll drown with them." Chloe clenched her fists, the ring on her finger now feeling like a weight rather than a symbol of love. She took a deep breath and, without another word, removed the engagement ring from her finger. Holding it in her hand for a moment, she looked at Andrew, who was watching her with pleading eyes. Without hesitation, she threw the ring at him. "Keira was right," she said, her voice steady, though her hands shook slightly. "I'm not going to ruin my life for this." The sound of the ring hitting Andrew's chest seemed to hang in the air. His face twisted with disbelief, but Chloe didn't give him the chance to respond. She turned away from him, her heart pounding in her chest, and made her way across the room toward Keira. Keira was standing at the edge of the crowd, watching everything unfold. She caught Chloe's eye, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was a flicker of something in Chloe's gaze. Regret, fear, but also a sense of clarity. As Chloe approached, Keira didn't move. She stood tall, her presence commanding, even in the face of everything that had just happened. "Chloe," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I won't fire you." Chloe blinked, surprised. She had expected Keira to be angry, to make an example out of her, but Kira's response was different. "Your project was excellent," Keira continued, her gaze steady, "and I respect your ability. But," she paused, her tone softening just slightly, "this isn't just about business. You have to be careful who you choose to stand by in life. The man you're with isn't worth your time." Chloe's eyes welled up with tears as she nodded. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing Keira speak it aloud made it real. She was ashamed of herself for not seeing it sooner. Ashamed for believing in someone who had never cared for her in the way she had hoped. "I know," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to be part of all of this." Keira placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression softening. "You made a mistake, but it's not too late to correct it. Come to my office tomorrow. We'll talk about your future." Chloe nodded, tears now streaming down her face. "Thank you," she managed to say through the sobs. "I'll do better." As Keira turned to walk away, she glanced back once more at Andrew, who was still sitting at the table, his world falling apart around him. She didn't feel sorry for him. He had brought this on himself. The Hall family's downfall was complete. The press had already started snapping pictures of their disgraceful exit from the gala. The images of Andrew, Mrs. Hall, and even Chloe, looking utterly defeated, would be all over the news by morning. Keira didn't feel victorious. She wasn't here to gloat. But the battle had been won, and now it was time to move forward. The sun had barely risen, but the Hall family was already at the height of their turmoil. The news of their downfall had spread like wildfire, and their world was collapsing in on itself. Andrew and his mother, once so certain of their place in society, were now reduced to bickering in the rubble of their former lives. Andrew paced back and forth in the living room, his face twisted in frustration as Mrs. Hall stood by the window, eyes narrowed in disbelief. The house, once their sanctuary of wealth and status, was now sealed off by authorities. The financial debts had caught up with them, and everything they had worked to build was being taken away. "This is your fault," Mrs. Hall shouted, her voice shrill. "If you had managed things better, if you hadn't been so reckless, none of this would be happening." Andrew stopped pacing and turned to face his mother, his expression a mixture of anger and resentment. "My fault? You think this is my fault? You're the one who always pushed for more, always wanted to show off, always thinking we were invincible. You never once asked me what was happening behind the scenes. We were drowning, and you just kept throwing money at the problem." Mrs. Hall's face turned red with fury. "Don't you dare blame me for your mistakes, Andrew. I made you who you are." She waved her hand in the air dismissively. "You were nothing before me, and now look at you." Pathetic. The word stung, but Andrew didn't flinch. Instead, he turned away, his voice low and bitter. I was nothing before you, and now I'm nothing after you. Look at us, Mother. We have nothing left. No money, no connections. Nothing. As their argument escalated, it was clear there was no reconciliation left for them. They were too far gone, their lives too tangled in lies and deception. The Hall family had reached their breaking point, and there was no saving them now. They were left to tear each other apart in their own empty house, unable to face the truth of what they had become. Meanwhile, Keira sat in her office, the early morning light filtering through the windows as she looked out over the city. She could feel the weight of everything that had happened, but there was no sense of triumph in her heart. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival, about cutting away the toxic remnants of her past so she could move forward. For the first time in a long while, Keira felt light. The burden of the Hall family, their drama, and their manipulation had been lifted from her shoulders. The last chapter of her life with them had come to a definitive close. She could breathe again. She turned her attention to the papers on her desk. The decision to promote Chloe had been difficult but necessary. Keira had always believed in the importance of merit, and Chloe had proven herself despite the mess she had been dragged into. Keira signed the official promotion papers, making it clear that Chloe would now take on a more significant role within the company. Keira also signed the documents to fund a new initiative, a charity dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs. It felt like the right step forward, a way to create something positive in the wake of all the destruction. Keira knew that her strength came from building, not tearing down, and this was her way of ensuring that she left a lasting, meaningful legacy. As she signed the final document, Keira stood up from her desk, her gaze steady. She wasn't looking back at the Hall family or their collapse. She was moving forward towards new heights, new challenges, and new opportunities. She walked out of the building, the morning air crisp and fresh. Her steps were confident, her mind focused on what lay ahead. As she reached the street, she saw Andrew standing by the corner, hunched over and disheveled, his eyes pleading for help. It was a pitiful sight, but Keira didn't feel any sympathy for him. Andrew took a hesitant step forward, as if he might approach her, but Keira's security team swiftly intervened, blocking his path. Keira didn't even glance in his direction. She didn't need to. Her journey was no longer tied to him or to any of the ghosts from her past. As she got into her car, she took one last look at Andrew, standing defeated on the corner, his hope dashed. A faint, knowing smile tugged at her lips. The greatest revenge wasn't about destroying someone. It was about living a life so remarkable that their existence became irrelevant. The car door closed behind her, and Keira drove away, her eyes focused on the road ahead. The world was hers to conquer,